Hi, hello everyone. My name is Arturo Mendoza, and I am the director of the Mexican Studies Center here in Johannesburg, in South Africa. Welcome to this series of lectures that are going to be given by me and other important scholars that work in the area of English for research and publication purposes. I'm gonna give today two presentations. The first one is obviously about our university, the publishing process. Sorry, the publishing situation in our university, but also in Latin America, and we will see also the dominance of English in the publication, not only obviously in Mexico, Latin America, but also around the world. So then let me give a presentation of I'm going to give this presentation like 45 minutes, and we will have a break, which is going to be like a short discussion between us so that I also get to know you and we get to interact between each other. And please feel free to interrupt me if there is a question, if you would like me to clarify something, if there is something that you don't understand, please let me know, and I'm more than willing to explain again or say things in Spanish. You can also talk to me in Spanish or English, whatever you prefer, like without any problem. Okay, so let's begin with this presentation. So as I said, during this first module, during these 5 sessions, we are going to talk about the situation of scholarly publishing in our university in Mexico, Latin America, and particularly the problems that scholars and students like you face while trying to publish in English your research. So as you might know, like UNAM is classified as one of the best higher education institutions in the world, and obviously that's also the case in Mexico and Latin America. So UNAM is usually the second, third best university ranked in Latin America, usually after the University of Sao Paulo. So also the 2 biggest universities in Latin America in terms of the number of students and scholars. But UNAM also plays like an important role around the world. Like if we think about our institution, it has many branches in Mexico City, it has many branches in the country, but it also has 13 branches around the world, all of them with some areas in common, and obviously each of them with strategic differences, like different system in terms of like strategies to follow and different aims and objectives. But UNAM, like in Mexico, on obviously the different branches across the world, we also play an important role in strengthening like Spanish language in different countries and latitudes. As I said before, it's a university. It's a big university in terms of numbers of students. So nearly 370,000 students and 42,500 scholars that were registered in 2022. But also look at the number of postgraduate students. It's around 33,000 like postgraduate students in 42 postgraduate programs that incorporate several master, postgraduate, and specialized studies. So just so that you can have an idea about how big UNAM is, UNAM is around 10 to 12 times bigger than the university where we are. We are at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, and this university, the Witwatersrand University, is also ranked along with the University in Pretoria, like the 2 most important universities in Africa. And UNAM is like 10, 12 times bigger than the university where we are. And obviously, some other important facts. We have 35 research institutes and 15 faculties, nearly 5,430 scholars that belong to the National System of Researchers in Mexico, which is very important because that means that 25% of the overall production of, like research articles published in indexed journals, they are produced at UNAM. That means that 1/4 of all the articles, the research articles in indexed well-known journals, are developed by UNAM. And also so that you can get an idea of how big our university is, UNAM published in 2021 1,558 books. That's nearly 30 books per week in average. So this is an important number of publications that our university contributes with. And obviously the research budget for 2022, it was 13,000 million pesos, which was 26.9% of the total budget that the university had. All this information, you can consult it here at estatistica.unam.mx, numeralia. And there are also other important facts from our university, but this also speaks a lot about the money that the university and the country invests in research at UNAM. So if you look at this chart, it is the productivity, and look at the comparison between 2000 and 2020. So in 2000, we can see the total of production, like nearly 8,340 papers, books, chapters, and technical reports, out of which like close to a little bit more than 2,000 were like totally like indexed articles in well-known journals. And then you can see that the difference between 2000 and 2020. So that figure almost tripled in 20 years. No? So now we can see the comparison of 6,308 indexed journals, articles in journals. So that's like that number has almost tripled in 3 years, in 20 years. And obviously UNAM's ranking, UNAM is usually ranked as one of the best universities around the world. In 2022, the QS World University Ranking placed UNAM in the position 104. So UNAM sometimes is a little bit below, a little bit above 100. But that means that it's an important university, not only in Latin America, but in the world. So then you can see, for example, in this chart, you can see in the last 10 years, the position where UNAM has been located, and specifically in the past 4 or 5 years, we can see that it's close to the position number 100. And this has to do, there is there are different parameters that that are taken into account, but you can see, for example, how important is UNAM in terms of its reputation and the employer reputation and international research. So these are the highest scores that we have. And then, yeah, there are some areas where the numbers are quite low, like the citations per faculty or the international students ratio. So those numbers are quite low. Particularly, let's talk about also the pandemic, because the international student ratio probably was not very high also because of that. But so this is a parameter that also gives us an idea of what are areas of opportunity for our university to improve. Now look at this, like university ranking in Latin America. So the first university was the University of Buenos Aires. Sometimes there are different parameters, so different companies take or entities, they use different parameters. But here, for example, we have the University of Buenos Aires. Usually the University of Sao Paulo, it's ranked higher than UNAM and University of Buenos Aires. And then we can see like how it spreads across like other Chilean universities, and usually it's Brazil, the one who is leading. But again, it depends who conducts this type of surveys. Now, the best 10 universities in the world: MIT, Cambridge, Stanford, and then all the UK and American universities are usually leading the most important universities. We will also see why. But this is where we are currently. And then, so again, why are we not in the best universities in the world? So they take into account these 6 different criteria: the academic reputation, the employer reputation, faculty-student ratio, citations per faculty, international faculty study ratio, and international student ratio. So particularly, as I said, the problem is with the citations. So that means that the papers that UNAM scholars publish are not as cited by other researchers as other people around the world. So this is one of the reasons why we score so low here. And this is something important that affects our institution in terms of ranking, but also in terms of the research and the reputation that we have. So, well, this is just how they calculate these citations per faculty. This is based on Scopus database. We'll talk about also what Scopus is and Web of Science. So now, so I spoke about UNAM, then I spoke about Latin America, but what happens around the world? So this is how the world would look like if it was based in terms of the research. So as you can see, like Europe, the United States, Canada, China, and Australia, they are leading the publications around the world. I don't know if you have heard or if you have ever gone to CIMAGO. So CIMAGO, it's a repository. It's like a bank of all the journals that qualify. So journals are split usually in quartiles. So the best journals, you will always find them with a Q1, which means that these have a very, very high reputation. And then it goes from Q1 to Q2 to Q3 to Q4. And CIMAGO, and there are journals that do not qualify. So CIMAGO, it's a database that only includes those journals who qualify with this sort of standard quality, and they have a good reputation. So I took this information like a couple of weeks ago, 2022. So look at the number. There are two, because we will make a contrast between Latin America and Mexico. But look at this. It's 27,000 journals that CIMAGO identifies within this quality control ranking system that they have. And then what you will see is that obviously the flags and the American and the British flags, they immediately pop up because these are the leading countries that have the most important journals in the world. And we will also see how that affects us and also those from other countries who do not speak English as their first or native language. Then let me move to this. So this is very interesting. It's a bibliometric and scientometrics study. Céspedes conducted this research just last year, and it's very interesting to see. Like for example, so she compares two big databases, Scopus and Web of Science. So look at this. You can see immediately that the United States on the left-hand side, you see the United States and the United Kingdom. So the United States and the United Kingdom, they have almost 50% of all the journals in the world. This is Scopus, and obviously Web of Science is very close, 49%. So imagine like half of the journals, they are located in the United States and in the UK. And this is why English plays now a major role in the language that we use to publish, or that we are forced to. We can also have a discussion about that. Interestingly, the Netherlands is the second one. And then you see this drastic decline, and then only countries like Spain or China, Switzerland, Italy, depending who conducts this survey, it's only like 2.5%, which is still not bad. But then also, if we look at the language, this is very interesting to see how Scopus shows that English is almost 80% of all the journals. They request people to publish in English. That means that if we want to submit an article in another language, it's not possible. So from these 78% to these multi-language journals, which is only 8% to 2%. That multi-language means that a lot of journals, they accept publications maybe in English and Spanish, or English and Portuguese, English and French, English and German. More recently, some journals will also tell writers like you have to publish in 2 languages. So you can submit your paper in Spanish, but if it's accepted, then you have to translate it into English, or the other way around. If you send your paper in English and it is accepted, then you also have to translate it into Spanish. But now look at again at the drastic decline, like especially here in Scopus. Like Spanish is let's say the second language after English, but English it's 80% and Spanish is only 2.3. So just look at the sharp contrast between obviously 8% and 2% of journals in Spanish-speaking countries that publish only in Spanish. And then that's followed by Chinese, German, French, Portuguese, Russian, Italian. So all these countries, we don't even account for 10%. And English, it's almost 80%. This is very interesting because if we think about Spanish and Chinese or Mandarin, for example, Spanish is the second language in the world, obviously spoken by native speakers. So close to 550 million people in the world speak Spanish as their mother tongue. There are 21 countries in Latin America and Spain, and 1 in Africa that speak Spanish, and it has Spanish as the official language and the most important spoken language in the country. So it's interesting to see how English has dominated this field in the area of publications. Although Spanish is maybe as important as English in terms of the number of speakers, we can see that Spanish is not as important as English when we want to publish. So there is a clear domination of English and hegemony of English in terms of publication. And then Web of Science has a little different chart with results. I mean, still English is 62%, but the problem with the Web of Science is that they have a large amount of journals without data. So they don't really have that information. So 30% of all they don't have information on 30% of the journals that they consult or that they have registered in their databases. But we can still see that maybe a lot of these journals will publish only in English. And then we can also see here Spanish, but Spanish it's in the same scenario. So it doesn't matter like what happens here in between with these 30% of journals. We can see that Spanish, it's still very close to 2%. So 2% of the journals in the world just publish in Spanish. This has actually become more acute in the previous years. I'm showing you an old chart. This chart is from 2000. So look at the number, like how drastically it has declined. We have French, German, and Spanish. And we have the percentage of journals that publish in these three languages. And we can see Spanish hasn't really changed that much, but we can see, for example, German, how much it declined from the 1980s to 2000, from let's say a little bit above 5% of the journals to nearly 1%, and now we can see that's even less because we saw that in the previous chart. So that's also leading, like, whether we like it or not, we can have a discussion whether we like it or not, but this is narrowing that down to we have to publish in English in order to have visibility. We can also see that later that, now like CONACYT is making a lot of pressure to scholars to publish in these well-known journals that are in the Q1 level. So this is narrowing down everything to we have to publish in English. I don't know if that's fortunate. I don't know if that's unfortunate, but that's a reality. And this is what this part of the workshop, the course workshop, is intending to do, so that we have this awareness of, okay, this is a reality, and we also have to learn how to deal with this reality. Let me show you now again. So I started with UNAM, then I moved to Latin America, and then I moved to what happens around the world. Let's go back to Latin America. Let's see what happens in Latin America. So I showed you that there were before, and we can even see that so that we remember. Look at this number on the upper right-hand side. There are 27,000 journals registered in SIMAGO, or that SIMAGO recognizes with a good quality from Q1 to Q4. 27,000. And then let's look at the journals that are in Latin America recognized by SIMAGO. It's only 1,000, let's say roughly 1,000 journals out of the 27,000 journals. So this is a major problem because our journals in Latin America, like particularly because of the problem with language, they are not as highly ranked as other journals around the world. And that's why a lot of countries, they have also shifted from publishing in Spanish or other languages, could be Russian, it could be German, it could be French. Now they are also publishing in English in order to have more visibility and more impact. Now, if we also look at this, look at the flags. So now we have the Brazilian flags, the Chilean flag here. So most of the journals, of the high quality journals in Latin America are led by Brazil. So Brazil is doing quite well in terms of research in Latin America. Obviously, now the count starts here, like number 1, 2, 3. So this means that Perspectives in Ecology and Conservation would be the most important journal in Latin America. And obviously it's from Brazil. But if we look so that was the most important journal in Latin America. If we compare that with what happens in the world, the first journal in Latin America, the first and most important journal in Latin America, it's ranked number 2011 in the world. So even our best journal in Latin America, it's in position number 2011. Then comes Chile. We saw Chile here. Chile was here in position number 5, Revista de Ciencia Política. And we can see that this goes all the way down to nearly 6,000. So look at this big gap between 2,000 and then 6,000. Then let's look at the most important journal in Mexico, Annals of Hepatology. That's ranked number 13 in Latin America. It's in position number 7,165 in the world. So our best journal in Mexico, it's ranked in this position. And then position 15 in Latin America, Publicación Electrónica de la Asociación Paleontológica Argentina, goes down to not very far from Mexico, 2,333. So look at the drastic and sharp contrast between what happens in the world and what happens in Latin America. So even though the University of Sao Paulo and UNAM, we are ranked as the best universities in Mexico, there is still a lot of work to do in our countries. But also this is related, I mean, so everything is like a chain reaction, because obviously the more money that the government invests in research, also the more productivity that we will see. And this chart shows this contrast, and it says Latin America contributes with 3.3% of journals in Scopus and 4.9% in Web of Science. So this is as it's not a continent, but it's as Latin America. This is what we contribute to around in the whole world. So our contribution from Mexico all the way down to Argentina, we only contribute to, let's say, if we take the mean between these two databases, it's around 4% of the total population of the total number of journals in the world. And then we can see obviously that like Brazil, we can see Brazil, for example, it's 40% in Web of Science and 45% in Scopus. So Brazil contributes to almost 0.5% of what all Latin America contributes to journals in the world. This is followed by Mexico, and this has to do also with size. But let's say that it's followed by Mexico and Chile. We don't see a lot of difference, like Chile 9.3, Mexico 9.1, and in Scopus 12% and 13 in Mexico. So Brazil and Mexico and Chile are very similar. However, let's look at this important number. These are the $1 million that the countries spend in research. So Brazil spends almost $41,000 million in research, whereas Mexico spends $8,000 million, and Chile, look at this also big contrast. Chile, obviously because of the populations and the size of the country, only contributes with $1,500 million. And then look at the journals indexed in the Web of Science and Scopus. Chile and Mexico, it's the same. So Chile is doing very well in terms of the quality of the journals that they have in the country. And then finally, you can see the GDP. So this is also important because this shows how much money the gross domestic product. This is how much money our countries invest in research. So again, you can see Brazil, it's the only one that is above 1% of the GDP versus, for example, Argentina also invests is in the second place, but then Mexico and Chile, we are in third, fourth place, meaning that Mexico does not invest as much as other countries in Latin America for research. So again, so this goes back to the scientific production in Latin America. So we can see again the number of publications or articles indexed from Latin American countries, and again you can see Brazil, how many research articles they have in indexed journals. This is followed by Mexico, and then yeah, maybe it's Argentina, Chile, and Colombia. They are also very similar. So although we are the second country in Latin America in terms of production, scientific production, we can also see the big contrast between Brazil and Mexico. This also has to do with the population. I mean, obviously the population in Brazil is maybe 250,000 million people in Brazil, whereas in Mexico, maybe it's what, 120 million. Chile, it's a small country. It's maybe only 20 million people. I don't have the numbers in Argentina and Colombia. But I mean, it's related to the population, but not necessarily. In the case of Brazil, we can see that, yeah, it's obviously, and Mexico, it's obviously the population plays a major role here. And then if we look at these charts, we can also see how these articles have increased. You know, in Brazil first, then Mexico, Argentina. So all these countries, they sort of follow the same pattern of a steady increase. So it's Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, Chile, Colombia, and then Ecuador. So Ecuador is it's an interesting country that has been doing well, particularly in recent years, because we can see 2014 and the contrast between 2018. But there is no like a sharp increase or decrease in this graph. And then what happens now, again, going back a little bit, zooming in again, what happens here between Mexico and Brazil. So now we have this contrast between what happens in Mexico and then what happens at UNAM. So obviously, as we saw, like UNAM scholars, they contribute to 25%, which is 1/4 of all the articles that are indexed in Mexico. So this number of publications, it's, like what important at UNAM. But then we have Brazil, which is like a monster in terms of publications, sorry. And then we have the University of Sao Paulo. So the University of Sao Paulo is the country in Latin America with the most important number of scientific publications in Latin America. So this is like a little breakdown of the publications in our countries. And this takes, it's a yearly increase of the publications at these 5 different universities. So these are the most important universities in terms of research. This doesn't take into account what I showed you before, which was the best universities. I mean, you can also see that it's a little bit related. We saw in that chart, the QS world ranking, that University of Buenos Aires was first. But if we talk about research, we can see that University of Sao Paulo, it's number 1. And then it comes UNAM. We also saw that QS showed UNAM in 2nd place. And then we have University of Buenos Aires, and then Chile, and then Nacional de Colombia. This means that these 5 universities in Latin America are the ones that publish the most, and that are the most important universities in terms of research in the whole Latin America. Okay, so in terms of the journals, so I showed you before what happens in the world in terms of languages, but now we have a breakdown going back to what happens in Latin America. So this is a comparison of Web of Science and Scopus. You can see that Web of Science shows that 36% of the journals in Latin America only publish in English. So even in countries such as Mexico or Brazil or Colombia or Chile, 36% of these journals publish in English. We see that this number is very similar to the one from Scopus. So Scopus shows, Scopus shows 32% in Spanish first, but because there is a big number here in multi-language, and this is what makes a difference between Scopus and Web of Science. Multi-language. So we will see that now and what it means, because I think Scopus has a better breakdown of what happens in the journals in comparison with the Web of Science. Because if we look at Web of Science, look at this, like there are 24% of the journals with non-information. So this is what makes this difference between Web of Science and Scopus. But obviously we can see English in the Web of Science is number 1. Then obviously we have all these journals with no information, and then we have Spanish, and then we have Portuguese. Obviously Spanish is the most important language in Latin America, after followed by Portuguese. And here it shows a similar reality. Scopus shows Spanish is the first, 32%, and then Portuguese, it's the number 2, and then English, it's only on the 3rd place. But I think that here this information reveals a little bit more of what Web of Science doesn't. So if we look at now this chart, because I was curious about this, I was curious about this multi-language breakdown that Scopus has. If we look at this, now we can see there are, so all multi-language journals, look at this, it's English and Spanish, or English and Portuguese, or English, Spanish, and Portuguese, and only number 4 is Spanish and Portuguese. So that means that more journals are also, this also means that they are shifting, not slowly, but they are shifting to, okay, now we are accepting journals in English and, English or Spanish, English or Portuguese. I mean, unfortunately, probably we could argue, or we could hypothesize that in the future, they are only going to publish in English. So again, like this is just to highlight why this multi-language figure is so big. It's because they are publishing in English and Spanish or Portuguese. So what we have to do, it's like we need to strengthen the scientific and academic development through research publications. So UNAM really has to work hard on this. We as a community and institution, we have to work particularly hard on this if we don't want to fall behind. So what are the challenges? So the challenges is the dominance of English as a language of science. Again, we are going to have a short discussion on this after I show this presentation, but this is a reality. So there are historical and political reasons that favored English from other languages. And this is, I'm not going to go into this, but it was particularly after the Second World War that the United States had a boom in the publications because Europe was completely destroyed. So they took advantage of this and English went to the sky in terms of publications. And that's what started tracing the path that we are now following in and that we conceive as English is a language of science. Again, there are lots of arguments against and in favor, but this is a reality as we have seen. And other languages, unfortunately, has been completely displaced, like Chinese, French, German, Russian, or Spanish, important languages in the world. This is a very interesting article, and the article actually has this title: "You don't say what you know, only what you can." The problem for us is that it doesn't matter how good is our research, it doesn't matter how well is our thought or our writing in Spanish, but if we can't say that in English, it looks like we don't know. So this is a reality. Perez Llantada, Ferguson and Plow, they conducted a study, and then I'm just highlighting these two sentences. The first one, it says, English is perceived as the lingua franca, so publishing in Spanish is considered less useful and less prestigious than publishing in English. We will also talk about this. This is what scholars perceived. That doesn't mean that it's a reality, but it's a perception. You may share this perception or not. The second one, scholars tend to believe they are linguistically disadvantaged compared to Anglophone academics, and they often require translating and language editing services. So this is also a reality. This is part of what we found in the study that I conducted with my colleagues 5 years ago with UNAM students, is that we sort of perceive that we are at a disadvantage. Why? Because we don't speak English. We don't speak English in our universities, and we have never been instructed in English in our universities. So that's why we sort of have this sensation or feeling that we are at a disadvantage. Okay. So the reality is that scholars in semi-periphery countries such as Mexico, so I'm not going to go in detail about what are periphery countries, but basically in Latin America, there are 4 countries that are considered in the semi-periphery, which are Mexico, Chile, Brazil, and Argentina. We are far from elite academic institutions, and we face numerous disadvantages, disincentives, and obstacles to publish in well-known peer-reviewed journals. And some of these challenges are discursive challenges, and some of these are non-discursive challenges. The idea of this course that we are developing for you guys is that you learn about both, because it's important to learn English, but English is not enough. So English is not enough to solve the problems that we have. There are other non-discursive challenges that are also important, and we are going to see them very quickly. Obviously, this is something that we go in deep during the course. So discursive challenges are the genre expectations. I don't know if you know this word, but just take note of this word, because you will see this during these following days very, very often. Genre means género, and género discursivo, it means the way you talk to a specific community. So the way people in chemistry talk between their community, it's a very specific way and different from the género discursivo of literature, of the género discursivo of poems or a newspaper. So this is something that we have to learn, the genre expectations in terms of the language and also the journal that is publishing or where we want to publish. The second one is the familiarization with the journal. And I'm sure that a lot of you in previous years, or sorry, during your postgraduate courses, you have had to actually read a lot, and a lot of the content that we read is basically journals. We also read books, depends on the field, but a lot of what we read is basically journals. This is important because this is how it's important to be familiarized with the journal where you want to publish and also the community in which you are. So again, people in medicine follow different conventions than people in history or than people in linguistics or people in physics or engineering. So this is something that you slowly start getting used to how they write and how they structure a paper. Another discursive challenge is how to write. Draft means like to write, no? Like hacer un borrador, no? How we make borradores, how we draft different sections of the paper. So every section of a paper has a specific purpose, and this is something that no one teaches us how to do. So this is a very important challenge that we face when we write a paper. It's not only writing introduction, methods, results, discussion, and conclusion, and then I write something. There is a very specific way of doing that. And there comes the discursive organization. That means how we write, especially when we write an academic paper, a research article. And then we have the syntactic and linguistic differences between our L1 and English. Why? Because our patterns and the way we write in Spanish is not the same, obviously, as what or how we write in English. And this makes a very big, important problem. Right? It's an issue because an English speaker has some expectations. So they expect the information to be in a certain way, and they expect to read something that they know is going to happen. And if we sort of go around, if we don't go to the point, it sort of annoys them because for them, it's our responsibility as writers to give all this information in a very well-structured manner. So these are some of the discursive challenges. So the idea of the course, the workshop, is to teach you how to deal with all these discursive challenges. There are other non-discursive challenges that we obviously don't deal with that are obviously also very important. These non-discursive challenges are, for example, the economic constraints. So on top of the language and the discursive challenges, we also have these challenges. So we don't have the same money for research than what the United States or the UK has. So this is a challenge. This is a reality. Our labs, our computers, our systems, our software, we don't have as much money as what other European countries, American countries like the USA and Canada have. Obviously, the time management, it's also a problem because for us, just the fact that we have to write in English, it takes much more time. And if you have ever published something or written something in English, you know how difficult it is. It takes sometimes 2 or 3 times more to write something in English than to write it in Spanish. The third is a lack of expert help of literacy brokers. Literacy brokers are those who are well acquainted with the knowledge in English. So, for example, if I study a master's degree in the UK, my thesis supervisor, who speaks English, because obviously all the courses are taught in English, my thesis supervisor is going to help me with the English. But sometimes in Mexico, Latin America, at UNAM, we have this problem because our thesis supervisors, sorry, I'm missing an H here, it's thesis. Our thesis supervisors, sometimes they don't speak English, or they are not also very good with English. So they can't help us, even if they want. Sometimes they can help us with the content, but sometimes they can't help us with writing in English. And obviously professional writers, so obviously, in the USA, Canada, the UK, they sometimes have writing centers or writing or instructors that know exactly how to teach English for these specific purposes, which is writing a research article. And then obviously the lack of policies. We don't have policies. For example, Europe is changing a lot for different reasons, but also one of the reasons is that, for example, like Polish universities or Czech universities, now they teach also their courses in English. Why? Because they want to train their students from early stages to get used to English, write in English, speak in English, but that's also an important strategy to attract international students. So if I am from Mexico and I want to go to the Czech Republic, then I don't have to be able to speak Czech. I can speak English, and then I will just register in English courses. And we don't have these policies in Mexico. And you will tell me if you know one single postgraduate program that teaches all the courses in English. If we are lucky, there is one or two programs, one or two subjects that will be taught in English. And the last one, well, lack of networks, because sometimes, I don't know if you also have had this experience, but a lot of these networks, they come from core countries like the UK or Canada. So they are the people that are leading projects. So sometimes we don't have enough networks to work in collaboration with other scholars. And also the bias against scholars. That is also a reality. It's not to use that to victimize about our reality, but there is a bias against scholars located in semi-periphery countries. And let me just show you this. So bias son sesgos, no? So I'm sure you're used to this word. Bias son los sesgos, it says bias against scholars in semi-periphery countries. It's a study that Ross and collaborators conducted in 2006. And the title is Effect of Blinded Peer Review on Abstract Acceptance. So then you can also look at the paper. I thought I had a reference here, but otherwise it's at the end of the presentation. So it says, for example, the context. Peer review should evaluate the merit and quality of abstracts, but may be biased by geographic location or institutional prestige. So what they did is all the abstracts submitted to the American Heart Association Annual Scientific Sessions research meeting from 2000 and 2004 that were open and blinded review. So they found that during an open review, 40% of USA and 22.6% of non-USA abstracts were accepted. Why? Because this was the open review. They knew who was writing from the US and who was not writing from the USA. Look at the difference. Whereas during blinded review, 33.4% of USA were accepted. So that changes from 40 to 33, obviously down, and then from 23.7 in other countries that were not from the USA. So again, we can see an increase from 22% to 23%. It's not a lot, but you can see that how there is a bias when it comes to the peer reviewers, when they see sometimes our names, where we conducted our research, where was the research conducted. This is something that plays also an important role. And I'm not talking about language now. I'm just talking about a pure bias based on a geographical situation. So he concludes evidence of bias in the open review of abstracts favoring authors from the United States, English-speaking countries outside the United States, and prestigious academic institutions. So this is why now, you know, in the peer review process, there is a big debate, but also they are like editors particularly, they try to strengthen that the peer review, or yeah, it has to be a blind peer review process. So ideally, the reviewer should never know where you are or where you come from. But that's not the reality in most of the cases. So what are the consequences of the marketing of scientific knowledge? So there are commercial interests and codependency. So the problem is that the problem for us, but also in favor of these big journals in the UK and the United States, is that they charge money for translation services. So I conducted this research, like I did this example trying to see, okay, how much money would they charge me to translate a service in Elsevier? So then they tell you upload a document, and then they will tell you how much we are going to charge you. So if you want to translate your paper, and then I chose my document is in Spanish, translate my document into American English, the area of study is architecture, and then you select the number of words, blah, blah, blah. It tells it's gonna be ready in 12 days, $681. $681 for translating my paper, selecting a 3,500 word article. So they are also making a lot of money, and they are also benefiting a lot from these translation services. And this is what we have to avoid. And the only way of avoiding this is by teaching our students to write in English. Because if you learn how to write in English, then you don't have to ask for these services. Then you can be, there is no codependency. Then you also learn to be independent and sufficient to write your own articles in English. So the solutions. This is a study that I conducted with my colleagues. We just published this paper at the beginning of this year. But this is an important thing. So there is an urgent need in our universities, like Mexico, like UNAM in Mexico, with mediums of instruction other than English, to develop scaffolded writing transition for graduate students before they are requested to write in English for research publication purposes. There is also a need for professional brokers, such as trained English language instructors at UNAM and academic brokers, like our mentors or thesis supervisors with experience publishing English, to guide students in writing in English for research publication purposes. So we have a big challenge. And the big challenge is how to increase or how to have better tools to write in English. I wrote here the references. I'm going to send you a PDF with the presentation so that you can look at information if you want, or the sources of information. This is the first presentation. The other one is obviously smaller, but now you are all here. I would also like to open a discussion and take a little break, but also I also want to start getting to know each other. So if you can turn on your cameras, and then pueden participar en inglés o pueden participar en español, whatever makes you feel comfortable. Again, today you can do that with me. Hoy pueden hablar conmigo en español. Con los otros académicos, pues nos toca hablar en inglés, ¿no? De todos modos, yo voy a estar aquí para ayudarlos, pero bueno, igual y si tienen algún comentario, qué opinan, sabían algo de esta información. Let's just take a short break before I go to the other presentation. And yeah, so who wants to say anything? Turn on your camera so that we can also see each other. I know that during the presentation it's not important, no es importante en la presentación, pero aquí nos podemos ver un poco. Van a estar aquí juntos y trabajando también en algún momento con sus compañeros en las próximas sesiones. ¿Algún comentario, alguna pregunta, algo que no quedó claro en la presentación?
Bueno, no sé si me escuchan. Buenos días.
Sí, ¿qué tal? Buenos días.
Muy bien, muy bien. Bueno, primero agradecerle por tanta información muy interesante. Hay muchas cosas de lo que usted nos dijo que yo no sabía personalmente. Sí me hace muy interesante. Si vamos a estar escribiendo artículos en inglés, empezar por ahí. Entonces, más que preguntas o comentarios, sería felicitarlo y
Gracias.
también agradecer la oportunidad para que nosotros podamos mejorar nuestras habilidades para escribir. Y yo creo que eso es el inicio de ese desafío que estamos aceptando para mejorar las publicaciones que nosotros podemos hacer en la UNAM.
Sí, perfecto. No, pues claro que sí. Muchas gracias, Nick. Y no, pues es un gusto. Yo todo lo que les pueda compartir, las personas que van a estar en los próximos módulos es gente muy experimentada, es gente que tiene mucho conocimiento, ha trabajado muchos años con la UNAM. La UNAM empezó estos cursos en el 2011. Entonces, empezaron ya hace bastante tiempo y estos académicos han trabajado muy de cerca con los estudiantes de la UNAM, con los académicos de la UNAM, saben bien las dificultades que enfrentamos y la realidad que tenemos, ¿no? Eh, Solamente para que se den una idea, y ahorita lo vamos a ver en la otra presentación, este, yo, bueno, no sé, cada quien tendrá su historia y si alguien la quiere compartir adelante, si alguien ha publicado también y quiere compartir algo adelante. Yo publiqué mi primer artículo en inglés después de que tomé mi curso de escritura académica en el posgrado y publiqué mi primer artículo en el 2017, creo. Después de ser profesor de inglés, después de haber estudiado inglés durante muchos años, y fue bien difícil, o sea, fue bien difícil, ¿no? Porque además llegan los comentarios de los dictaminadores y en general son, en general son educados, ¿no? Los dictaminadores, pero son bien duros, o sea, son bien duros, ¿no? Entonces, sobre todo si quiere uno publicar en revistas que están en el cuartil 1, en el cuartil 2, los dictaminadores son súper especialistas, que es una de las ventajas. Son especialistas, obviamente, del área, pero son bien duros, ¿no? Y son comentarios que a veces, pues, lo tambalean a uno mucho, ¿no? Antes de eso ya había publicado otros 3 artículos en español. Yo soy del área de lingüística, entonces es muy frecuente publicar en español o en inglés o incluso en otras lenguas, también en francés, en portugués, en italiano. Y después de eso, pues he publicado, no tengo una colección como muchos académicos, a lo mejor, ¿no? Pero he publicado unos 15 artículos y de esos 15 artículos, los últimos 4 los he publicado en inglés y sigue siendo una dificultad, o sea, es algo que no se acaba, ¿no? Es algo que no se termina con un curso, es algo que no se termina publicando el primer artículo, ni el segundo, ni el tercero, ni el cuarto, es algo que continúa y que solamente uno va como gradualmente acostumbrándose, haciéndose a la idea, entendiendo, ¿no? Aprendiendo. Entonces, bueno, pues lo dejo ahí para que lo consideren, pero bueno, igual si alguien tiene algún otro comentario, algo más que quieran aportar.
Yo,
Sí,
buenos días a todas y a todos.
¿qué tal?
Gracias, Arturo, bueno, por el curso y por la información. Yo nada más, pues es un poco una inquietud, quizás una pregunta. Al principio, cuando mencionabas que la mayoría de publicaciones académicas en el mundo son en inglés y el español tiene tan poquito, pues como margen, justo bueno, pensé que cuando menos en mi experiencia, lo que he visto en las investigaciones en humanidades, que es mi área, pues nuestras fuentes casi siempre son de autores angloparlantes, ¿no? Entonces, y bueno, ya ahora que continuaste con la presentación y nos explicaste un poquito cómo está el panorama y cómo funciona, pues, la revisión de artículos, etcétera, pues entiendes, ¿no? Porque hay una predominancia de publicaciones en inglés. Pero entonces yo me pregunto cómo hacemos para revertir esto, o sea, porque siento que este curso, es decir, seguir publicando en inglés es a la vez retroalimentar o alimentar ese ciclo de, pues, entonces sigámonos en inglés, ¿no? Entonces, o sea, es una parte necesaria como para validarte hasta cierto punto o para darle, pues sí, como valor a tus publicaciones. Pero ¿cómo hacemos en donde decimos, bueno, ya no voy a publicar en inglés, ahora voy a empezar a publicar solamente en español para darle realce a las publicaciones académicas en español? O sea, el problema es que ¿quién va a darle valor o importancia o ranking a tus publicaciones en español? O sea, es como un círculo, no sé si vicioso o virtuoso, o no sé, ¿qué piensas tú? ¿Qué se puede hacer? ¿Qué estrategia se puede hacer pues justo decir, bueno, ya estuvo bueno de inglés, ahora vámonos con otro idioma, ¿no?
Sí, gracias por tu comentario. Pues, o sea, coincido contigo plenamente. Además, como que de esto nos deja un poquito un sabor agridulce, ¿no? Pues es que voy a escribir en inglés y voy a sentir que estoy como traicionándome a mí mismo y a mi comunidad por escribir entonces en inglés. La realidad de las ciencias sociales, humanidades y artes también es esa, o sea que tenemos muchos artículos en español. Desafortunadamente, como a veces están también entre nuestra propia comunidad, no están en estos altos índices de calidad como otras revistas, ¿no? Generalmente, y bueno, mi experiencia, lo poco que he aprendido en estos quizás 10, 12 años es que están como también son más abiertos, ¿no? Las publicaciones en inglés son como bien específicas, aunque sean de áreas de humanidades, ciencias sociales, son a veces muy, muy puntuales y nosotros tenemos todavía áreas bien amplias, ¿no? Tenemos revistas que abarcan educación, ¿no? Entonces, toda la educación, ¿no? En vez de hacer una cosa tan puntual, ¿no? Como hacen las revistas normalmente en inglés. ¿Cómo revertir eso? Pues es un gran reto. O sea, creo que parte del curso es ese, que aprendamos ¿no? Pero también aprender a defenderse, es decir, saber qué es importante publicar en español o de vez en cuando, sobre todo nosotros que estamos en humanidades y artes, en ciencias sociales, también publicar en español, ¿no? Es decir, saber que está la posibilidad de publicar en inglés, saber cuándo hacerlo, pero no dejar nunca de lado el que podemos publicar en español y eso, por supuesto, que contribuye muchísimo, no solamente a estar ganando los puntitos del SNI, los puntitos del CONACYT, los puntitos de acá, el que tenga 3 citas más, es realmente abrir esa discusión a nuestra comunidad académica, ¿no? Eh, Hay 2 artículos, otra vez, yo no soy el académico que tiene miles de citas, ¿no? Pero los 2 artículos en los que tengo más citas son artículos que están publicados en revistas en español y que no están dentro de los cuartiles de calidad que manejan estas grandes instituciones. ¿Eso qué significa? Que hay una comunidad importante que está leyendo mis artículos en español. Y los artículos en inglés que tengo no han tenido el impacto que han tenido mis artículos en español. Entonces, eso también es importante valorarlo, ¿no? Es decir, bueno, también es importante escribir en español porque sí hay una comunidad bien grande en América Latina, en Iberoamérica, vamos a decir, todos los que hablamos español, que se van a interesar por nuestras investigaciones. Otra vez, en área 1 y área 2 es bien difícil porque a veces no hay, ¿no? O sea, si hubiera alguien de aquí de física nuclear o de astrofísica, astronomía, van a decir, bueno, pues es que no puedo publicar en español, ¿no? O sea, tengo que publicar en inglés porque ahí hay cosas, pues sí, son cosas universales, ¿no? Y nosotros tenemos muchas veces contextos locales a los que también podemos acercarnos. Entonces, creo que es eso, es entender que el inglés es una herramienta, ¿no? Y que no dejarnos que la herramienta sea la que nos domine ni la que tome decisiones por nosotros, ¿no? Pero pues sí, muy interesante el comentario y sí, gracias.
Gracias a ti.
¿Alguien más que quiera compartir algo? ¿Alguien de los que ha publicado? Veo, había una lista de ustedes interesante y hay quienes han publicado en inglés y en español, tanto de manera autónoma como con alguien. ¿Alguno de los que ha publicado algo que quiera compartir cómo fue su proceso?
Bueno, voy a tratar de interactuar. Sí, yo he publicado hasta ahorita solamente en Congreso Nacional. Yo soy del área de ingeniería y ahí no fue tan complejo. Digo, sí recibí comentarios y fue un poco tardado también el proceso de mejorar el artículo. Y ahorita en donde me estoy tardando más es en mi primer artículo del doctorado y yo cometí el error de empezar a escribirlo en español y después pensar en traducirlo y eso me da, yo siento, ahorita que ya estoy un poco más avanzado en el doctorado, yo siento que me tardo más, yo trabajo más, yo trabajo de más que si lo hubiera empezado desde inglés y después de haberlo publicado traducirlo al español. Pero yo estoy en el proceso y algo que me ayudó mucho y también yo aprovecho para compartirlo con todos es que en mi equipo de trabajo del doctorado, nosotros nos volvemos revisores, es decir, cada quien estando escribiendo un artículo lo comparte con otro compañero igual estudiante antes de que el tutor lo revise o antes de que lo mandemos. Y eso nos ayuda mucho porque al intentar corregir el trabajo del compañero, nosotros aprendemos más y vemos, siento que desarrollamos una habilidad que es muy útil para mejorar nuestra escritura.
Sí, qué bien. Mira, qué bueno que comentas. Bueno, pues felicidades que ya estás también involucrado en tu proceso de escritura. No es un error, ¿eh? Eso de empezar a escribir en inglés, escribirlo en inglés, en español y luego traducirlo al inglés, pasa muy frecuentemente, yo creo que por dos razones. La primera es porque nuestras tesis están en español. Entonces, lo primero que hacemos es sacar toda la información de nuestras tesis, que además también otra cosa importante, entender que el artículo no es ni el resumen de la tesis, ni el capítulo 3 de la tesis, no es eso, ¿no? O sea, un artículo es una aportación y una investigación muy puntual, que es la que queremos compartir, ¿no? Entonces, no es ni la síntesis de la tesis, ni eso, pero la mayoría de nuestros artículos casi siempre vienen de información que tenemos en español, ¿no? Más en nuestras áreas de ciencias sociales y humanidades, estamos escribiendo en español y de pronto, pues, a ver, saca aquí, saca de allá. Esa es la primera razón. Y la segunda es que, obviamente, también es un proceso natural. Es un proceso natural que no está mal también empezar en español y después ya lo escribe uno en inglés, se tarda uno años, o sea, se tarda uno pues el cuádruple, ¿no? Porque está uno escribiendo en español y luego ahora piensa en inglés y luego si tus textos estaban en inglés, regrésate a los textos en inglés a ver cómo lo decían en inglés para ver más o menos, o sea, porque se perdió ahí como que información entre la traducción y la transición. Es un proceso normal, entonces es parte del proceso, ¿no? Escribir en español y después escribir en inglés. O hacer modelos híbridos, ¿no? Hay gente que cuando hicimos esta investigación con los chicos, porque les preguntábamos, ¿cómo escribes, no? Hicimos un estudio cualitativo. Bueno, ¿cómo escribes? No, pues es que empiezo a escribir en inglés y se me va la idea y la escribo en español. No, pues estoy escribiendo en inglés y ya no sé cómo decir esto en inglés y saco el diccionario, el traductor, lo que sea, y lo escribo ahora en inglés, ¿no? Usen todas las herramientas que puedan, porque para eso están. Yo uso Google Translate, yo uso los tesauros, yo uso Lingüe, o sea, uso todo lo que puedo porque para eso está, ¿no? Eso de, es que una persona no debería de usar Google Translate, por supuesto que no. Yo a veces escribo en inglés, le pongo el traductor en español, veo lo que dijo en español, lo pongo en español y otra vez en inglés para ver ahora qué me está poniendo en inglés, ¿no? Entonces, usen todas las herramientas que tengan y la idea, pues un poco del curso va a ser también, bueno, compartir eso, compartir técnicas y procesos, porque como dices tú, uno aprende mucho de su comunidad, ¿no? Entonces, el poder compartir esto con los colegas, con los compañeros del posgrado, pues qué bueno que lo hacen. De verdad es algo que creo que los posgrados deberían de incitar para que todos vayan avanzando también en un fin común, ¿no? Que es vamos a publicar nuestros artículos, vamos a difundir nuestra investigación. Bueno, vamos a seguir. Les voy a hacer la presentación. Si no hay alguna otra intervención, voy a seguir y después damos otros minutitos para reflexión. Esta presentación va a ser mucho más breve y también aborda las cosas que el curso, los aspectos que contenidos del curso. So I'm going to switch to English, but as you can see, this is something that we can also do. We can speak in English, we can speak in Spanish, we can use both languages. It's important to be able to communicate in whatever we can communicate, okay? So it's not like, oh, I'm here, I have to speak English. It doesn't have to be like that. So feel free and feel relaxed. I'm not going to judge you. No one is going to judge you. We are all here to learn. I still have so much to learn, and every time that I sit down and I design these type of things, I learn so much, and I learn a lot from students as well. Okay, let me share now my other screen. Okay, so now I'm gonna go a little bit more in detail about what means to publish in English and what are the challenges and the requirements. As I said, this is going to be a little bit faster so that we can also have more time to talk. So I think one of the questions is why write? I mean, why do we write? And why do we have to write to also be part of a community, right? To be part of our group, either at the university or in our field of study. So obviously there are different reasons why we write. So graduation requirements. I asked you in the survey how many of you need to publish in English. Sorry, how many of you have to publish a research paper? And 21 of you said that you have to publish a research paper because it's part of your graduation requirement. So now it's something that didn't used to be like this before, but now it's a requirement. But it's also personal achievement. So when you write and then you publish a paper, it becomes an achievement. It's not only the thesis is already like an obstacle, but it's then on top of that, it comes a research paper and it's a personal achievement. It's also academic status. So we want to be part of a community, an academic community. We have to publish, and it starts, the more we publish and the more well-known we become, you know, that also gives us academic status. Academic growth and development. Obviously, when we write, when we publish, we also grow academically speaking. And then eventually, if you want to work in academia, then you have to publish. So like publishing is becoming now the most important criteria to hire scholars. Before, and maybe our parents or my parents' generation, it was like, you have a PhD, we will hire you, like, you know, because no one has a PhD. Now, a lot of people have PhDs. There is a lot of competition. And then those who manage to show that they have more publications are the ones that are hired. And then why in English, right? So we already saw that. We already saw all these numbers, and the, you know, 50% of the journals are in the United States and the United Kingdom. But sometimes this is difficult, and it gives frustration, it gives anxiety. It makes us feel like this is not fair. So we feel like we are at a disadvantage, but it's a reality. So I think it's better to embrace realities and try to learn how to, you know, like cross these obstacles. Yeah. So obviously in the field, in English, like it's split basically into two branches: English for academic purposes. Sorry, I'm missing a 4. English for academic purposes and English for specific purposes. What is the difference is that English for specific purposes can be, yeah, English for academic purposes is one branch, but it's also like, for example, for those who wants to be pilots, those who are in law, those who are in medicine, it could be sports, it can be anything where English is needed to be part of something, especially international committees in any field. And then English for academic purposes. So what do we have to write? So we write, you know, exams, assignments, theses. We write for grants, grants proposals, research publications. So there is a lot of things that sometimes we write in English. Our situation is it's very different because we are in mediums of instruction different from English. That means that we learn in Spanish. So we go to our classes, we speak in Spanish with our lecturers, no? We speak in Spanish with our thesis supervisor. We sometimes or usually speak in Spanish in a conference. We present our projects in Spanish. So everything that we do, it's mostly in Spanish. So that makes a big difference. And sometimes we will only use English if we want to present in an international, you know, colloquium, congress, conference. And then we have to be able to speak in English to give our presentation. We have to be able to write in English, just our abstract and our PowerPoint presentation, and that's it. And then it comes a publication. So you can see now the gap, you know, and you can see also the disadvantage in which we are, because if we were in the United States, we go to classes and everything we read in English, we hear lectures in English, we write assignments, tests, presentations, everything in English, and then we write a thesis in English, and then we write a research article in English. And then look at this. So we have none of that. And then we have to write a research article, and sometimes in English. So that makes it quite challenging. Why? Because a research article depends on many things. So this is the circle of how we write a research article. So we generate the ideas, we, like have an outline, we write, the proposal that we have our research questions, we conduct our research, then we start drafting, we start writing, the different sections of our article. And most of the times, this is where the drafting comes from the thesis. So this quite often is going to be taken from a thesis. And then we edit our draft with whoever can help us. It can be, sometimes if we are lucky, our thesis supervisor, it could be a friend, it could be a colleague, it could be an English native speaker. And then we edit and we revise our paper. That means a proofread. The revise comes from the examiners. So if we are lucky that someone is a journal has accepted that, it's an interesting study, then it goes to the peer reviewers, then they will decide. Very often, if not all the times, it comes with changes. And in most of the cases are major changes. Sometimes when I submitted my first English article, it came with so many changes, I didn't know how to start. So it was like, basically they said like, okay, this is interesting, but you have to reformulate everything. You have to rewrite everything. You have to change a lot of information. And it's very difficult because once the peer reviewer, the reviewer sees your article and gives feedback, it depends on the journal. Sometimes you have 1 month, 2 months, or up to 3 months, sometimes when there are major changes to do these changes. And believe me, it's not easy. And then if you're lucky, then they accept the second round. Sometimes you can go to more rounds, and then they keep on asking for changes. And then they eventually, if the editor accepts that the article is ready to be published, then they will publish it. But this is usually the circle that takes to publish an article. So again, we talk about this, no? So when we publish, we are engaging in a conversation. So we engage in a conversation with people from our own field that are working on the same avenue. There are some academic slogans that maybe you have heard: publish or perish, no? Like publica o muere. What is not published doesn't exist. And sometimes it's true, sometimes like we students, we have remarkable researches, but we don't publish what we do. So if we don't publish what we do, unluckily, it's going to go to the thesis, like repository, the library, and then who is going to look at what we did? So we also want to, I think it's important to show what we have done and to contribute to the research community by sharing these. So it's important to share what we also do. It's I think this is one of the most important values of publishing. So publishing in English means to engage in a dialogue with this international community for personal reasons, for institutional reasons, but it's a dialogue that it's important for us. So who establishes the rules? So these rules are established by the scientific community, the academic community where we want to publish. So that means the journal, it means the language, and it also means those who are in that field that decide this is appropriate, this is not appropriate. Even the style, sometimes in psychology or social sciences, humanities, we use APA, but other fields use Chicago and other ones use Vancouver. And it's even things like this. It's something that the journal will tell you, this is how we want you to present your research article. So they have the standards. They are the ones that tell us how the rules are going to be played. We want to play what the journal says we have to play, So we are not going to tell the journal, well, this is how I wrote the paper. No, it's like, this is how we want the paper. So, they will give you information about the number of words or the number of pages or the number of sections, or if you can have heading or subheadings. So they will tell you basically how to write the paper. They give you some guidelines, and some of the journals now I've seen that they also tell you, like, they give you like a good guide. Okay, this is how you should write your abstract. This is how you should write your introduction. But I think it's better to have a general idea, and it's good to choose a journal so that you can also start identifying what they want. But quite often it's also good just to write the paper and then find the journal, and because different journals will have different ways of dealing with it. And sometimes your paper is rejected. Sometimes it's not personal. Sometimes it means that this is not suitable for this journal. And sometimes they will say, like, we are not saying that this is not good, but this is not good for this journal. So it's like you are trying to play tennis, but we play here fronton or paddle or something else. So it's like it's not the appropriate space for you to publish. And sometimes we really struggle with articles as well. I have an article that I've been trying to publish like lately for the past 2 years, and I just can't manage to publish it. And I don't know if I'm going to let it go. So sometimes it's also good to let go and say, like, oh, maybe I didn't do a good research there. Obviously for you it's different because it's your thesis and you have to do it. So you have to know and learn this, what are the expectations. So it's important to know what they want, because if we know what they want, it's also better because we know how to create it, right? We know how to shape it. So the most important thing, and it's highlighted here, you need to convince this community that what you did is of value. If you can show that, believe me, even if your English is not perfect, or if there are problems with the English, but they will see the value and they will really try to encourage you to publish what you did. So the most important thing is the value of your research. So what we follow now, and what colleagues in different parts of the world started, especially in the 2000s, was this sort of critical pragmatic approach. So by that, it means two things. Like, the critical means to be critical. Like, why do we have to publish in English? Why do we have to do things like this? In a good way, you know, it's about learning, but also not just complying with the rules, but understanding that it's a way of doing things. And as we said before, we also have to acknowledge that our languages are important to be, you know, like set to the fore, like put in front sometimes. And then the pragmatic, it's basically deals with the language, you know, it means with the discourse challenges that we face. And nowadays, like recently, it's more like the combination of both. So it's important to be critical, and it's important to be aware of the difficulties that we are facing, but it's also important to learn how to do it. So basically what we do is we created this long time ago. It was not me. I have to acknowledge my colleagues at UNAM because I took the course, and then I took the course to be an instructor 5-6 years ago at UNAM. So we have these three principles. It's English. It's about learning English, how to use English, but English not like a general English course. It's about how to learn English to write, and not only to write, it's to write a research article. To learn about the academic genre convention. So what is the structure of a research article? What are the sections and the different phases in an introduction? How should we write or report the results? How should we deal with the discussion section? And then obviously what we are covering now, which is the publishing culture, the publishing principles that me and my colleagues in the future sessions are going to talk about. And then the question, I think I already answered that, will you be a perfect writer in English by the end of these course workshops? No, and that's not the idea. So the idea is like, I'm gonna write English with an accent, that's good, that's not a problem. There is a very slow but a recent awareness about like, people are writing, especially from non-English speaking countries. So the French, the Germans, the Italians, the Mexicans, the Spanish, the Brazilians, they are writing in English, and we all use different conventions and different, words and syntactic structures, but that's not the important thing. So the idea is that your paper is not rejected just because of language issues. So if your research is good, then work on the language so that everything looks good, so that everything is suitable for the journal. Then also the idea of promoting self-editing strategies, autonomy, so that you learn to identify issues and put into practice these techniques, and avoid translation services. Because if you send your paper to one of these translation services that we saw from Elsevier, $600 just to send the draft, if by any reason the reviewers send back the paper with more, or they will say like major reviews, that means you basically have to restructure your paper. So that means you have to pay again these translation services, and you never learn anything. So the idea is to be independent, or not to be codependent of translation services. Other colleagues, yeah, it's okay. And I think it's always very good, because that's how you start. That's how you learn. So I send it to my thesis supervisor and he gives me some ideas. I send it to a friend and he gave me some ideas. And slowly and gradually, you start becoming more and more independent. So obviously the aim of the courses are these: to become and to be more aware of these idiosyncrasy in the Anglo-Saxon world and the editorial world of publishing. To review, obviously, grammar, the syntax, the style, and the conventions that you need to write a research article in English in different fields, because each field has their own ways of doing it. And also so that you are confident when you want to publish your paper. So it's important that you have this confidence. We actually, when we conducted the research in 2017, we interviewed one of the students, and she was devastated. Like she said, like, I submitted my research paper, I thought it was ready, and the comments from the reviewers were extremely harsh, particularly on the language. So don't let the language be what is going to be used by the reviewer to reject your paper. So class dynamics, what we do is obviously through lectures. So we will show PowerPoint presentations like what I am doing today, but this is not the aim. It's just to have an understanding of a specific issue or topic. Group activities, but also peer revision work. Even if you are from a different field, if you can show something to someone from a completely different area, and that person doesn't understand what you are trying to say to the least, that's a problem. It's sometimes we know what language you are talking. That doesn't mean that it's clear. And obviously the workshop, the idea of writing in the sessions and to have like a individual review of what you do. I'm going to talk about the course because I developed this course, but then I'm going to tell you what happened. I think our parameters were very high because we wanted students to actually come with a draft, because that's how I took the course. And then I thought maybe that's how I should start developing this course. But now we realize that we have to go maybe two steps back, or 3 or 4 steps back, and then start with just being aware of the difficulties of writing in English, and then start gradually from there on. But the idea is that, like, you really take part on this and you engage on these courses. And this is what ideally we would give you after the course. So it's also like a qualitative report of how you did during the course, with some like good ideas about how to continue like developing your paper, because as I said, now we are shifting the course content, and the idea will be to start from 0 instead of starting with a draft. And then obviously to give you more guidance even after the course. So the previous course, it was I modified these because we received very, very few people interested in the course, because the idea was that you had to come here with a research article with a draft in English, and then we were going to work with a draft, but it's not going to work. So I decided to split this into 2 courses, 48 hours. And the course 1, so let's see, you will tell me if you're interested, and then we can start in October. Otherwise, we will start with you or other people interested in February. So it will be 8 hours, 3 sessions a week for 2 hours. And we would cover these 3 areas. So starting by understanding what's the structure of a research article, from what is the title and identify how titles are written all the way to the appendix or the acknowledgements, the writing conventions in different fields, including, for example, different approaches, who are you approaching by writing a paper, the cross-cultural differences between writing in Spanish and English, how to start writing from general to specific and from specific to general, because sometimes you have to play around depending on what section of the paper you are dealing with. It depends on the area, but some of the areas you work a lot with problem solution articles, so learn how to do that, how to write problem solution texts, or data commentary, when you have charts, when you have figures, when you have an image, and then you have to give information about visual information. And then the discursive, rhetorical, and grammatical components. All this is a grammar, but it's a grammar, but applied to writing and to writing a research paper. So how to use, what are the different parts of a speech? So what is the structure of a sentence? How to write a sentence? And what are the differences between Spanish and English? Punctuation. When we are defining a concept or naming something, what are the verbs that we should use? What happens to adverbs, and what is the value of adverbs if we have it in the middle of our verbs? Cause and effect clauses, passive and active voice, when to use one, what is the difference, use of participles, indirect questions, and then the dynamics through workshops, lectures, peer review work, group activities, individual progress, what I mentioned before. And then that will be one course that is 48 hours. And that, I will tell you, but for that, you wouldn't require anything. So for these, you don't need anything, but you would have to be there. Then for the second course, 48 hours, but then you have to bring your own data. So this would be for those who already have the data, and then they need to start writing the article. Or maybe you started, but then you have like a little bit of the methods and a little bit of the introduction, and you sort of wrote the results, but you're not sure about what you wrote. And then in this part, we won't start with a research article as we did before. So we start with how to summarize, how to synthesize, how to paraphrase, to paragraph, how to quote, how to use cohesive and writing and coherent writing techniques. What is the sentence structure again, but maybe more complex, or subordinate clauses, sentences, self-editing techniques. And then once you go through that, then we will go again to all the sections of the paper, starting with the objective. What is your objective? What is your hypothesis, or what is your research question? Because that is the most important thing that will dictate if your methods correspond to that, and your results have to correspond to your methods, and your introduction and your literature review has to respond to your research question, or actually narrow it down to your research question, and your introduction has to be in dialogue with your discussion. So we will go section by section, like applying all what you have learned. And then finally, the grammar, again, for the specific sections, because each section has different difficulties. So for example, reporting verbs, you are going to use more that for a specific section and in specific cases, or maybe like, for example, negative openings in creating a space of research. You will only use that probably in the introduction and the discussion when you criticize someone or say like, although he has done that, or although the research has been conducted in the area, there is no much knowledge about this, you know? So how do you have these, not criticizing, but just saying like, this hasn't been done, or he did that, but he didn't do it this way, and I'm doing it this way, and then I found this. So it's, again, the use of grammar for all these different sections of your paper. And then the last one is the requirements. This is something that we have been dealing with, and we're really trying to give these. I mean, I wish I could give this for free, like the whole course. Obviously, the first module that you are going to have, we are giving it for free because I think it's very important, and because the guest speakers that you are going to have are highly qualified and they are of great value. But obviously for the course one, you need to have an English level B1. We have an English placement test. So we would actually just administer the English placement test. If your English level is not at this stage, then you have to enroll in an English course. So then you would have to first go take some English classes and then take this course. So this is the price that we are going to offer next year. But I spoke to the administrative here and I said, like, I really want to give this and start this because I think it's important for students. So we will give this course for $100. I know that we are going to lose money, and it's not about the money, but I really want to start with this course with students because I know how important it is because I was also there as a student. And for the course 2, you will have to successfully complete the course 1. That means that your English level also should be, you know, at least the B1 level. And again, we are going to give you this for $100 because we want to start this, but that will be the next year. We'll send you an email tomorrow with that information. But that's what I wanted to share with you today. Tomorrow, I don't have a lot of time. I prefer to also finish with a little discussion with you guys. So tomorrow, Caroline is going to be here. She has worked a lot with very well-known international journals, and she's going to talk about a lot about ethics and misconduct in the scientific world. But let's open the session again. I want to hear if you have any other comments, if you want to share anything else. Again, tomorrow I'm gonna be here. Well, I'm gonna be here with Caroline. And then if you want to speak in Spanish, then you can speak in Spanish, and then I will translate so that you can interact. She's also going to make you work in groups. So we are going to use the breakout rooms. But let's open the floor. Are there any questions? If you can turn on your cameras. Guys, bueno, a ver, para mañana, cuando trabajen con Caroline, conmigo fue más bien una presentación. Cuando trabajen con Caroline, por favor, prendan su cámara porque, bueno, pues no está bien no verlos, ¿no? Sobre todo porque ustedes van a trabajar en un grupo, o sea, van a meter en grupos de trabajo y pues no está bien trabajar con un compañero a quien no le vemos la cara, ¿no? Digo, conmigo no hay problema y mi presentación fue un poco distinta, pero con Caroline van a trabajar más en grupos. O sea, bueno, los demás ponentes tienen diferentes estrategias dependiendo de lo que hagan. No sé cómo los vamos a acomodar. A veces vamos a acomodarlos por área, a veces los vamos a acomodar por, no sé, que tenga experiencia publicando en cierto grupo o, no sé, vamos a tener diferentes estrategias. ¿Algún otro comentario, algo más que quieran compartir? ¿Alguna duda, alguna pregunta? Bueno, espero que estén motivados, espero que estén interesados. Bueno, a mí me motiva mucho, no solo porque es mi área de investigación, pero también porque es un reto y creo que los retos pues hay que también abordarlos y afrontarlos, ¿no? Entonces, no podemos quejarnos de que nuestra universidad no ofrece cosas. Entonces, para mí es una responsabilidad ofrecerlas, ¿no? También. Sí, Emiliano.
Ya, gracias por la presentación. Yo me uní tarde a la sesión pero no sé si hablaste un poco acerca del uso, por ejemplo, de herramientas online de gramática en inglés, como por ejemplo Grammarly y todos esos software. Por ejemplo, en mi caso sí lo utilicé y fue útil hasta cierto punto. Obviamente no te permite, digamos, corregir ciertas estructuras gramaticales. Pero bueno, no sé si puedes compartir tu experiencia, en qué medida lo recomiendas o en qué situaciones en específico o hasta qué punto es
Sí,
útil.
sí, gracias Emiliano. Mira, eso es algo que se ve más a fondo en el taller. Yo lo que les decía es, yo utilizo todas las herramientas, o sea, de verdad, todas las herramientas que, bueno, no sé, a lo mejor hay otras que no conozco, pero yo todo lo que esté ahí lo utilizo. Yo Grammarly lo tengo en mis correos electrónicos, cada vez que escribo un correo electrónico, bueno, ahora estoy en un contexto en donde hablo inglés todo el tiempo, ¿no? Y tengo que escribir en inglés, entonces lo tengo ahí para mis correos electrónicos. Lo tengo para mi Word, ¿no? Entonces, Grammarly, claro, te va ayudando a entender como, ay, aquí puse this, no this, ¿no? O no tengo la concordancia de mi sujeto con mi verbo, o me está diciendo que es to participate in y no participate on, o focus on y not focus in. Entonces, claro que te va ayudando, ¿no? O sea, es una herramienta, otra vez, todas las herramientas son buenas, utilícenlas todas, ¿no? El problema es que la herramienta a ti no te va, o sea, la herramienta no tiene una capacidad crítica. O sea, la herramienta no te va, o sea, te va a corregir cosas técnicas así, ¿no? Que está bien, porque hay communities va con doble N y va con doble T o no va con doble T, pues no me acuerdo. Pues eso Grammarly lo hace, qué bueno, ¿no? Porque por eso está Grammarly. También hay otras formas que eso lo abordamos más en el curso, como cómo buscar en Google, ¿no? Si le pones entre comillas, te aparecen ahí frasecitas completas y decir, ah, mira, pues a ver si alguien escribe esto, ¿no? O sea, si eso es algo, una frase correcta, y a veces uno dice, pues será como mi español ahí con el inglés o si existe eso, ¿no? Entonces eso lo vemos más a detalle en el curso. Todas las herramientas, pues utilizarlas, ¿no? Los tesauros, ¿no? Como o combinaciones lingüe, lo que hace es combinaciones de palabras, ¿no? O cómo se dice esta palabra en un contexto. A veces no sabemos cómo se dice una palabra en cierto contexto y te va apareciendo ahí en diferentes contextos cómo se ha utilizado. Entonces, Grammarly, te digo, yo lo utilizo siempre, pero pues sí, hay varias herramientas, ¿no? Te digo, el traductor yo también a veces lo ocupo. O sea, a veces te digo, escribo una cosa en inglés, la copio en el traductor y la pasa al español y luego lo copio en español para que me lo traduzca en inglés a ver cómo se vio lo que hizo el traductor y qué fue lo que hice yo. O sea, todo te ayuda a aprender, ¿no? Otra vez, pues es un proceso y es un proceso lento, pero todo nos ayuda, ¿no? Word Reference también es bueno, ¿no? Lingüe y Word Reference son buenos. Sí, entonces hay varias herramientas. También ahora no sé, es que no me acuerdo, no me acuerdo cómo se llama, ya la instalé, pero que te ayuda a predecir un poco el texto también, ¿no? Entonces va uno escribiendo en inglés y te va prediciendo también, ¿no? Entonces pues te va ayudando a decir, ah, pues sí quería decir esto, o sobre todo con las preposiciones que son muy molestas en inglés porque son muy puntuales, ¿no? Y no, esto es in, esto es on, esto es into, esto es by, y entonces lo vas escribiendo y te pone ahí, no by, entonces te pone at, ¿no? Y todo eso pues nos va ayudando a aprender y nos va solucionando el problema, pero hay que recordar eso, ¿no? Que las herramientas tienen esa limitación, o sea, que no tienen nunca una capacidad ni crítica ni creativa. Ok, chicos, ¿alguna otra cosa, alguna otra pregunta? Sí, Nick.
Es acerca del borrador que vamos a utilizar. Los topics o los temas que tenemos que tratar ahí, ¿va a ser libre o hay un banco de topics que tenemos dentro del cual tendremos que elegir?
Bueno, la idea es que el primer curso, porque lo que también estuve observando es que la mitad de ustedes tiene, o sea, por lo menos de este grupo de 27 alumnos, es que la mitad de ustedes tienen su investigación apenas como al 50% o porque están empezando sus maestrías o sus doctorados. Entonces, hay quienes no tienen datos, o sea, no tienen como datos suficientes para escribir un artículo. Entonces, lo que vamos a hacer es como hacer una transición en donde, bueno, vamos a hacer este primer curso donde no tienes que tener datos, no tienes que tener nada porque va a ser muchas actividades de escritura como más controlada y de reflexión, ¿no? De decir, a ver, búscate, va a ser más de buscar artículos, búscate 10 artículos de tu área o que estás utilizando incluso ya en tus estudios, y de esos 10 artículos vamos a empezar a analizar introducciones. ¿Cómo ves la introducción? O sea, ¿cuáles son las transiciones que logras percibir, ¿no? O sea, como una especie más de autoconciencia de qué tienen diferentes secciones o cómo se utilizan ciertas palabras para matizar, ¿no? Para no ser tan drásticos y decir, esto es contundente, nadie ha hecho esto. Eso en inglés lo ven súper mal. Nosotros a veces en español lo hacemos, ¿no? Pero en inglés, cuando uno dice, yo escribí eso en uno de mis artículos en inglés y me pusieron ahí, no pongas overstatements, ¿no? Como, porque puse, nadie en el mundo anglófono cuestionaría esto, ¿no? Y me dijeron, no puedes poner eso, ¿no? O sea, entonces, no estamos acostumbrados a esas cosas, pero si los vamos viendo, si empezamos a hacer conciencia de ellos, la idea es que en el segundo curso lo apliquen. Entonces ya empezamos a tener conciencia de diferentes cosas y eso lo podemos ir aplicando después en el artículo, ¿no? En el que ya hagamos en el segundo curso. ¿Ok? Entonces, esa sería la idea, que el primer curso, ustedes busquen su banquito de unos 10 artículos que obviamente estarán citados en sus tesis, y de ahí que les gusten esos artículos también para que veamos cómo está la estructura, trabajemos con cosas más, de escritura más, vamos a decirlas más pequeñas, y el segundo curso ya que traigan sus datos y que empiecen a trabajar el artículo. Ok, chicos, ¿alguna otra pregunta? ¿Algún otro comentario? Cualquier cosa, pues cualquier pregunta tiene mi correo electrónico. Ahí está mi correo electrónico. Cualquier duda, cualquier observación, me escriben un correo. De todos modos, yo, como les dije, voy a estar aquí con ustedes en las sesiones, excepto la de la editora de la revista australiana, porque ella ya no me queda la hora y son las 12 de la noche para mí. Va a estar otra colega, pero yo estoy aquí mañana y el lunes y el miércoles. Ok, chicos, bueno, entonces mañana, cuando Caroline dé su presentación, pues sí, si hay que poner cámaras, pues por favor nada más procuren tener su cámara ahí disponible, ¿no? Entonces nos vemos mañana a las 8 de la mañana, que tengan muy buen día y esperemos irnos conociendo poco a poco.